Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh. This is really great to be here, and I have to tell you, since the only trips I've taken since I've been at the Pentagon the last 18 months have been to Kabul, Baghdad, Kandahar, and Vietnam. This is really great. Although I will tell you that the car that you arranged for me to come here from the airport will be part of the budget cuts. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. I have a whole set of remarks I want to make, but I just have to start by saying this is freaking amazing. Unbelievable. There is a lot to thank OutServe for, individually and collectively. Individually, to all of you for what you have done for your country. And collectively, what you've done with this initiative to help inform my colleagues who worked on the Comprehensive Working Group report and the land reports. What you have done for so many men and women who felt alone, incomplete, divided, and afraid. And what you have done and are doing for future generations of men and women who want to serve their country as complete individuals and now can. On September 20, Josh Seafried was part of a celebration that I had in my office. It was a pre-glee celebration. and he gave me an inscribed copy of Our Time. And I have read that book cover to cover. And I have read your stories, which are your journeys, your memories, and everything it took for each one of you, whether you're in the book or not, to be able to come to this place. And that book helped me frame what I want to say tonight. I did not serve in uniform. I cannot be a chapter in Our Time, but if I were a chapter in Our Time, I would want to start my chapter with the same initial confusion, uncertainty, and fear about my identity that so many of you started your chapters with. I would start with the goals that I had, the dreams that I dreamed. Mine began as a U.S. Foreign Service officer. I wanted someday to be an ambassador. But as I became aware of who I was, I felt at the time I had to put that aside. I had to put aside that dream and focus instead on what I could be as a divided person. One with a public life and one with a hidden private life. And like many people in such situations, like many of you, I threw myself into my work. I was successful as a professional and incomplete as a person. If I could write the chapter, Josh, I would refer to the long journey I took to becoming a complete person. For me, it would talk about the role of sports, and for me, masters competitive swimming and joining the DC Aquatic Club, where I found, as all of you are finding through your journeys, come here, that I was not alone, that stereotypes were shattered, that men and women from all walks of life competed and set and broke records, not straight records, not gay records, just speed records. In my chapter, like yours, would refer to my own personal aha moment when I did finally feel like a complete person when I won 2 gold medals in swimming at the 1994 Games in New York. And 2 years later, I would meet the person who now has been my partner for 16 years. My chapter would then turn to the Pentagon, and my first tour of duty there in the late 1990s. Don't ask, don't tell was the law of the land, and I was named to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. Attitudes were beginning to change, but only beginning. I was proud that then Secretary of Defense Bill Cohen and his wife Janet would always include my partner in invitations for dinners they would host for visiting ministers of defense. I was not so proud that my friends in uniform had no such rights. And that part of the chapter would include the story of a birthday party for a Navy officer hosted by his partner, a dinner attended by several of his friends in uniform and their partners, a dinner at which no one asked, no one told. But when discussion turned to the law, I was amazed and frightened by how many of the older officers in uniform hoped that repeal would come after their retirement from service. They were too close to retirement, they said, to risk the unintended consequences and fear of public debate. And then came the decade that we didn't expect. The attacks on the World Trade Center and on the Pentagon, crash in Shanksville, the deaths of civilian and military, gay and straight, the heroism of common individuals, gay and straight, the march to war, gay and straight. And attitudes continue to change. Will and Grace on television, Mark Binney, the gay rugby player and a hero of United Flight 93, Eric Alba, decorated Marine, and the first wounded soldier in Iraq, Andrew Wolfart, killed in action in Afghanistan, recognized not because he was gay, but because his leadership made a difference and still does. And a new generation, people like Mike Allman, who's here tonight, and Mike, I cannot wait to have you back at Pentagon. And Katie Miller, who had the courage to stand up so that those who follow her will be able to march forward. And as America and Americans have done throughout our history, in the darkest hours come our finest moments. So Josh, my chapter will then talk about the importance of Yes We Can. About the election of a young black man from Illinois to be president of the United States, about his commitment to extend Yes We Can to the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. And my chapter would describe first the surprise and then the delight and pride I felt to be named Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, in the knowledge that being the first openly gay Assistant Secretary in the history of the Pentagon was an asset and not a disadvantage. And it would talk about the call I got from the White House after I was nominated, saying that 2010 was going to be the year that the administration was determined to enable gay and lesbian soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen to serve their country openly, and that I would get to be a part of that at the Pentagon. And my journey in 2010 would be a complicated part of the chapter. That section would be framed in part by fear and part by hope. The characteristics that frame the commitment to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell all last year, both inside and outside the Pentagon. In my chapter, I will talk about the comprehensive working group report, the most thorough and comprehensive study on a personnel issue ever done at the Department of Defense. And I will remember the ongoing concerns constantly expressed about this effort. Fears by those favoring repeal that the report would result in findings that could be used against them. And fears by those strongly opposed to repeal that in fact those findings would be both supported and credited on open service. Like those of you who contributed to chapters in our time, I would remember a seminal event that marked a turning point for me in 2010. Mine would be in July of last year at Fort Hood. There, along with two co-chairs of the working group, Jay Johnson and General Carter Ham, two of the finest people I've ever met, I attended outreach groups intended to solicit attitudes of service members about the implications of repeal. And at the end of our day there, we were taken to visit a 5-member tank unit. We were asked to climb all over the tank and repeatedly told by our host there to experience for ourselves how close and cramped the space was inside. The unstated implication of this: how could we force straight service members to work in such close quarters with openly gay colleagues? So at the end of the presentation, 5 young men from the tank unit stood in front of the tank, and our host asked if any of us had any questions, and I did, and he blanched, but I asked him. And I asked the 5 of them standing there, if don't ask, don't tell is repealed, and one of you told the other 4 that he was gay, what would you do? And the first soldier said, my brother's gay, so it wouldn't matter to me. Second soldier said, my cousin is gay, so it's the same here. Third said, I knew a lot of gay people in high school. It wouldn't matter. The fourth had a similar response, and the final young man said, well, sir, what I care about is if this tank gets hit and I get hurt and that somebody's going to pull me out. And I don't care if they're gay or straight. I want to know I can count on them. And it was then I knew. It was then I knew what the results of this report would be. And it was then I knew what I realized I had always known, that the military is not separate from society. It is a reflection of it. And my chapter, Josh, would definitely include my reaction to reading the final report, which was direct and simple and powerful. And it said, based on all we saw and heard, our assessment is that the risk of repeal of don't ask, don't tell to overall military effectiveness is low. And it said, when asked about having a service member in their immediate unit who said he or she was gay, would that affect the unit's ability to work together to get the job done? 70% of service members predicted it would have a positive, mixed, or no effect. And it said, the general lesson we take from the transformational experiences of the integration of blacks and women into the military is that in matters of personnel change within the military, predictions and surveys tend to overestimate negative consequences and underestimate the U.S. military's ability to adapt and incorporate within its ranks the diversity that is reflective of American society at large. I read that report as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. And as a human being, I wept and was overcome when I read it. Your chapters in our time, this book of your journeys to this moment in this place, are short and powerful and to the point. And so my chapter would of necessity have to be short on describing the year filled with tension and drama and frustration regarding the political fortunes in Congress when votes in the Senate seem first to rise like waves of hope and then crash on the shores of fear. But in my chapter, I'm confident, Josh, that you and your editors would leave in the parts describing the admiration and respect I felt for Mike Mullen, my friend and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who distilled a sea of debate into 2 essential points. Our service members must not live a lie, and those who lead them must do what's right for them. They would have to leave in the parts in my chapter about the final December vote and my certainty, despite great concern we were going to lose, that we had reached a moral tipping point. My certainty that in this era of partisanship and rancor in our darkest hours, there would be 60 men and women in the United States Senate who could not go home and look themselves in the mirror and say they denied to fellow citizens the rights which they themselves enjoyed and for which those fellow citizens were fighting and dying on the battlefield. And Josh, you would have to leave in the part about my going to the podium in the Pentagon press briefing room on July 22nd of this year to announce that the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had all signed the required certification stating that the repeal and accompanying policies are consistent with the standards of military readiness, military effectiveness, unit cohesion, and recruitment and retention of the armed forces. And you, of course, because you were there, would have to include the part about September 20 without the Glee reference. The part that would say that 10 gay and lesbian service members in uniform standing in my press room as Defense Secretary Panetta and Chairman Mullen noted that repeal was coming, then came into my office and joined civilians and service members, gay and straight, including you, Josh, and Tara, and representatives of groups like the Service Members Legal Defense Network and Service Members United and HRC and PalmSec and Third Way and so many others, and military and civilian members of the repeal implementation team like Lindsay Runner and Jones McGee, and members of my staff, gay and straight, in my office, united and doing nothing more than sharing a beer together. So my chapter, like yours, now brings me here. And for this part now, there are no words to adequately describe how I feel. A guy who thought he could never be an ambassador because he was gay. Here tonight, as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, to read to you the following letter. I'm so pleased to send my warmest greetings to all those attending the inaugural OutServe Armed Forces Leadership Summit. And I want to thank each of you for your service to our nation. Today, less than 1% of Americans serving in our military, they bear 100% of the responsibility of protecting our nation. As you know well, when our troops are called to action, so too are their families. Military families support and sustain the service members that defend our freedom, care for our wounded warriors, and survive our fallen. I believe all of us have a role to play in ensuring our service members and their families have the support they've earned. That's why Dr. Jill Biden and I launched Joining Forces, a nationwide initiative to recognize and support our military families. We are joining forces with cities and states, families and communities, businesses and nonprofits, asking everyone to do their part to honor and serve families just like yours. Until very recently, gay and lesbian Americans had to serve in silence, but in spite of this tremendous obstacle, service members like you persevered. With courage and determination, you chose to serve and continue to exemplify what is best about the American spirit. I truly hope joining forces makes a real impact in your lives, and I hope it is worthy of the strength and commitment you and your families demonstrate every single day. Thank you for your extraordinary service to our nation, and please remember to stay connected with Joining Forces. I wish you all the best. Michelle. And so, Josh, my chapter for our time brings me to this place as it does you and all of you. But it doesn't end here, nor must your chapters end here. A new chapter begins here. And we need to write those chapters for a second book. And the second book, I hope we will call it, We're All in This Together. Because throughout this journey, for all of us has run a common thread: service to country, service to, with, and for our fellow Americans. So our next chapters must tell stories of how we have brought to greater public attention the challenges and difficulties faced by wounded warriors, gay and straight, as they re-enter American society. They have gone through experiences, as Admiral Mullen said, their fellow citizens cannot know in their souls. We have to focus on how we bring greater public attention to the difficulties that children of service members face in school, in dealing with their peers, in seeking acceptance and normalcy as we have sought. We must talk about how we use our networks here, military and civilian, to help employers understand that they too can serve their country by helping service members not just to find jobs, but to provide the technical and the social skills to enable them to succeed in doing them. Because after 17 years of fear of what would happen to the military if gay and lesbian service members were to be allowed to serve openly, the thunderous lesson learned here is nothing's happening. And the lesson all of us must now learn and apply is to live the words we have spoken so often for 17 years and for so many years before that. Sexual orientation does not define us. We all have the right to define ourselves, and we are all in this together. Men and women of OutServe, men and women of the Armed Forces of the United States, I salute you. Thank you.